chat box what country you are from so that we can learn where our audience is coming from. We have an exciting program for you today with both informative and entertaining. We will be taking a 15-minute break around 10 a.m., during which you shall hear the United Nations Symphony Orchestra with a special performance they have created for us, and see a short video. Afterwards, there will be a blue ribbon interactive panel of experts discussing what actions need to be taken to realize the decade of healthy aging, 2020 to 2030, what the World Health Assembly has endorsed and what the General Assembly is expected to launch officially very shortly. And now, well, now she was welcoming me, but I'll go back to what I had to say now. We just would like to take a moment before we start the formal program to offer all of our sympathy to those of you out there who have lost someone during these historic and unsettling times. Now we'll go back to the program. And again, I'm reading Martha's script, so you guys have to please bear with me. It's my great honor to be able to introduce the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez. The Secretary General is a very busy man with many demands on his time and many requests for remarks on important occasions. However, he has taken a long interest in the issues of older persons and recognized the important place that older persons hold in functioning and well-being of societies around the world. In May of this year, under his leadership, the UN issued a major policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons, a brief that recognized vulnerabilities and contributions during the pandemic. Listen now to the Secretary General. We're not here.
The world marks the 30th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons, as we reckon with the disproportionate and severe impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has wrought on older persons around the world, not only on their health, but on their rights and well-being. Older people must be a priority in our efforts to overcome COVID-19. In keeping with the theme of this year's commemoration, we must also examine how the pandemic might change how we address aging in our societies. Expanding opportunities for older persons and increasing their access to health, pensions, and social protection will be crucial. This year's observance falls as the world is also marking the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife, which highlights the vital role of health and social workers, such as nurses and midwives, in responding to the pandemic. The majority of them are women, including many older persons. These are the people who devote their lives to our care and to the care of older persons, mothers and children, and deserve far greater support. As we seek to recover better together, we must make concerted efforts across the decade of healthy aging, 2020-2030, to improve the lives of older persons, their families, and communities. The potential of older persons is a powerful basis for sustainable development. More than ever, we must listen to their voices, suggestions, and ideas to build more inclusive and age-friendly societies.
Betty, can you please unmute?
Sorry. We'd like to thank the Secretary General for taking the time during UNGA to record this message. He has been a strong and vocal supporter of older persons. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce a short video from Her Excellency, Ms. Maria del Carmen Skeff, the Permanent Representative of Argentina to the United Nations and the President-designate of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging and the Commission on Social Development. Please note that the ambassador will be speaking in Spanish. So if you have not clicked on an interpretation mode, you need to do that now by going on the icon, the interpretation icon, so that you can hear in your desired language. Thank you.
Estimados colegas, amigos y amigas, es un honor haber sido invitada a participar como oradora en esta actividad tan especial que marca un hito, ya que celebramos el año 2020 de Commemoration, el 20º aniversario del Día Internacional de las Personas Mayores, el 25º aniversario de las Naciones Unidas. Quería comenzar agradeciendo al Comité de las ONGs sobre el envejecimiento y al Departamento de los Asuntos Económicos y Sociales de las Naciones Unidas por sus esfuerzos en la organización de este evento virtual, especialmente durante estos tiempos tan difíciles en que los enfrentamos debido a la propagación del COVID-19. Asimismo, quisiera expresar mi admiración y reconocimiento a todas las trabajadores y trabajadoras de la salud por su encomiable e incansable labor a lo largo de todo este tiempo. El 75 aniversario de las Naciones Unidas llega en un momento en el que el mundo entero se enfrenta a las devastadoras consecuencias del COVID-19. La pandemia no solo ha provocado efectos devastadores en las esferas sanitarias y socioeconómicas, observando las desigualdades existentes entre las personas y los países, sino que ha provocado una crisis de derechos humanos y ha planteado desafíos sin precedentes al mundo. Expresar nuestra más sincera preocupación por el grave impacto que la pandemia ha tenido en la vida de las personas mayores. Un riesgo significativamente mayor de mortalidad después de la infección, y también enfrentaron un historia de corrupción, violencia, abuso y negligencia, dificultades económicas y falta de protección social, entre muchas otras cosas. Estamos en un momento decisivo que requiere una acción inmediata a fin de escuchar la voz de las personas mayores con una discriminación basada en la edad y asegurar el pleno disfrute de su derecho a la salud, la vida, en igualdad de condiciones con los demás. El país cree firmemente que las medidas tomadas como respuesta al COVID-19 deben adoptar un enfoque de derechos humanos, promover la efectiva protección de las personas mayores, incluir sus necesidades específicas y garantizar su derecho al más alto nivel de salud física y mental y su acceso a tratamientos en su vida, como así también proteger su bienestar social y económico en igualdad de condiciones. Quisiera compartir con ustedes la experiencia en cuanto a la necesidad de los adultos mayores que hemos impulsado en Argentina. Hemos tomado medidas como el otorgamiento de subsidios extraordinarios durante la emergencia sanitaria, la implementación de un permiso de circulación para asistencia a personas mayores durante el confinamiento. Se impulsaron campañas de información en redes sociales y acceso a líneas gratuitas exclusivas para que las personas mayores puedan realizar consultas sobre la pandemia y el cuidado de su salud. Adoptaron planes de contingencia para la prevención y el abordaje del cuidado integral de las residencias para personas mayores y pautas para el cuidado de la salud mental. Ponemos a disposición todos nuestra experiencia, exhortamos a todos aquellos que deseen presentar la suya como aportes para enfrentar los grandes desafíos elegido para la conmemoración de este día tan especial, 2030, resulta crucial para reflexionar sobre los otros grandes retos que tenemos por delante en la pospandemia, a fin de avanzar hacia una mejor reconstrucción que sea intergeneracional, inclusiva de los adultos mayores, saludable, equitativa y sostenible, como lo refleja la decisión adoptada por la 73 Asamblea Mundial de la Salud, que endosa la propuesta de declarar 2020-2030 la década de envejecimiento saludable. Como presidenta del grupo de trabajo de comunicación abierta para el envejecimiento, estoy orgullosa de ser parte de un foro internacional dedicado específicamente a los derechos de las personas mayores, con una amplia y activa participación de todos los actores relevantes que dan visibilidad a la necesidad de promover y proteger los derechos humanos de las personas mayores. He ayudado a reflexionar sobre las brechas legales existentes y los cursos de acción innovadores que mejor se adapten a las necesidades actuales y futuras de las personas de edad. Asimismo, me gustaría enfatizar acciones de la sociedad civil que han sido siempre actores claves. El máximo compromiso de la Agenda 2030 de no dejar a nadie atrás nos marca la imperante necesidad de redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para que el pleno ejercicio de los derechos de todas las personas mayores sean garantizados por los Estados, a fin de avanzar hacia sociedades más justas, inclusivas, resilientes e igualitarias. Quisiera reafirmar mi incondicional compromiso con este grupo, en mi capacidad personal como representante de la Argentina, país que ha hecho de este tema una para impulsar la agenda del envejecimiento en las Naciones Unidas y abogar por la inclusión, el pleno disfrute de los derechos humanos de todas las personas de edad. Muchas gracias.
Andra, I've been sending you some chats. Some of the speakers are not able to get in. They've been sending
Yes,
emails.
looking into it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'd like to thank the ambassador who, for those of you who don't know, she just received her certification as the ambassador, and we're so thrilled she was able to join us today, again, during this extremely busy time. We're gonna move into what on the program is listed as part one, which is the reflections and the celebrations of the 75th anniversary of the UN and the 30th anniversary of the IDOP. 2020 has been a truly historic year, and one that will be very hard for most of us to forget due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But it has also been a year of celebration and reflection within the UN, with many anniversaries to celebrate. Just to name a few, it's the UN's 75th anniversary, it's the 30th anniversary of the UN IDOP, it's the 25th anniversaries of both the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and the Beijing Platform for Action. It's also the 5th anniversary of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. So we have much to celebrate this year. So with that in mind, we have invited His Excellency, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the 74th session of the General Assembly, to share his reflections via a short video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the NGO Committee on Aging for inviting me to participate in this important event. I welcome your innovation in hosting your annual celebration of the United Nations International Day of Older Persons online, which enables even more people to connect on this occasion. 2020 is a landmark year for the United Nations. As we mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we recall that many of the older persons we celebrate today have witnessed rapid societal change over the 3/4 of a century since the creation of the United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly was at the fore of this change, shaping the normative development and bringing about change through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and even the adoption of the resolution, which declared today an International Day for Celebration. Of course, 2020 will be considered a historic year for another reason, the COVID-19 pandemic. Older persons and those with underlying medical conditions are at higher risk of serious illness and death from COVID-19 and have borne the brunt of this terrible illness. Moreover, prolonged lockdowns affect the social and economic well-being of older persons, particularly those who live alone. Separation from children and grandchildren has caused sadness and anxiety. To this end, I call on all member states to involve older persons and consider their specific needs at home or in care facilities in the rapid response to COVID-19 and long-term recovery plans. We simply cannot forsake older persons at a time of crisis. This is a time for international, intergenerational solidarity and solutions. I urge individuals around the world to look out for older persons in their community and find ways to support them while respecting social distancing guidelines. Remember, we are only as safe as the most vulnerable members of society. Finally, I thank all healthcare professionals and frontline workers who have been the heroes of this pandemic. In particular, as this is the year of the nurse, I thank all nurses who have played a key role in the care of older persons prior to and during the COVID-19 pandemic. I wish you all good health and look forward to working with you to uphold the rights of all older persons throughout the 75th session of the General Assembly. Thank you.
And we thank the presidents of the GA for taking this time to give us those inspiring words. We're now going to move into the reflections on, from the committee. And again, I'm reading Martha's. The UN IDOP is one of the highlights of this year's activities for the NGO Committee on Aging. We've been organizing the observance in coordination with the UN DESA for 30 years. Cynthia Stewart, the current chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York, has some reflections for us now on how it got started, who some of the key players were, and where the UN IDOP fits into the 75-year history of the UN itself. Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martha. And I want to give my own special welcome to everyone around the globe to this first virtual International Day of Older Persons. It really is gratifying to see people from so far and yet so near, and that we all share one global community. The UN is 75. When the UN was created in 1945, the average life expectancy here in the United States was 63 for men, 68 for women, and in less developed countries, far less. So, UN at 75 is quite old by that standard. Next slide. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights that His Excellency Bosker just referred to in 1948. I was really pleased to hear him reference that, but I would like to point out that the declaration states, quote, that there is no, that we're entitled to rights and freedoms set forth without regard to, quote, race, color, sex, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Notice there is no reference to age. So I think aging wasn't exactly on the radar screen of the founding members of the United Nations. Well, how did that come about? Well, on this slide, you will see on the 14th of December in 1990, the UN General Assembly designated the 1st of October as the International Day of Older Persons. Originally, it was designated as the International Day of the Elderly, but a few years later, it was changed to older persons. Also note that the next year, the GA, by resolution, adopted the UN principles for older persons. So what was happening at the UN? Who were the people who made a mark and championed our cause? Next slide, please. I'd like my section today to be a tribute and dedication to all those people, past and present. Certainly, I want to start with a dedication to Julia T. Alvarez, the former ambassador, alternate representative of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations, to the UN agencies, particularly DESA and the focal points on aging, program on aging directors and staff throughout UN agencies, our own UN NGO committees on aging, which were established in New York, Vienna, and Geneva in 1977, to the UNIDOP co-chairs and chairs. They put such tremendous amount of work each year into making this observance extremely relevant and celebratory, and also to the civil society organizations working in this space. Next slide, please. The late Julia T. Alvarez was a critical voice that raised awareness of aging issues at the United Nations. She was ambassador, the alternative representative of the Dominican Republic, and her career began at the UN in 1978. Her brother was actually the ambassador and actually appealed to her to come and be his alternate and help him. And she was the one who is really very credited with being the force behind the establishment of the International Day. Next slide, please. Alex Kalash knew Julia Alvarez very well, particularly while he was still in London, working and also participated in the Second World Assembly. And while he was director of aging programs at the World Health Organization. He referred to Julia, and I quote, a giant, a great champion for older persons. She had passion, commitment, and charisma. He told me how she would walk into a room of ambassadors and be quite capable of shaking her finger in their face and telling them what they needed to do and how they needed to vote on issues related to aging. He also said she was one of the most vocal opponents of the mandatory retirement age of 60 at the UN. That tells you something about where the UN was back then. Dr. Kalash also referenced people from AARP who were very helpful to Julia in raising awareness of issues of aging internationally. Next slide, please. Charlotte Nusberg, former, actually did work for a few years as Secretary General of IFA, told me a very interesting side story that I want to share with you. AARP founder Ethel Percy Andrus always thought that there should be an international involvement of older persons. And as a result, AARP was a catalyst for the founding of the International Federation on Aging in 1973. And IFA was one of the first organizations to call for a World Assembly on Aging. First one was actually held in Vienna in 1982. Charlotte shared with me that she worked on a document for IFA titled Rights and Responsibilities of Aging. Charlotte took the document to Julia Alvarez to see how to get it adopted at the United Nations. Julia immediately said, rights will not work, but principles will. In addition, according to Charlotte, it eventually lost the responsibilities, but this document became the United Nations Principles for Older Persons, adopted by the General Assembly in 1991. Next slide, please. Alexander Sidorenko, or Sasha, as he is affectionately called by everyone who knows and works with him, was head of the UN Program on Aging, first in Vienna as of 1988, and then in New York from 93 to 2009. A long tenure indeed, Sasha. And he also served as the coordinator of the International Year of Older Persons, and then on to coordinate the MIPA planning program. When I asked him about what he thought were major contributions, he says, and I quote, "I reckon the observances of IDOP during the years of preparing for and celebrating the International Year of Older Persons in 1999 were of utmost importance." End of quote. He called out the positive fact that there were regular contacts between the UN Secretariat, the NGO Committees on Aging, and felt the COA in New York was instrumental in connecting the UN to various partners in civil society, citing specific examples of AARP, FIAPA, HelpAge International, IAGG, and IFA. Next slide, please. Meet Terry Hawkinstad. He reminded me that the Berlin Wall had come down in 1989 and had opened up Central and Eastern Europe. He noted those countries were aging more rapidly, and there was a thirst to enhance their educational infrastructure with a tremendous interest in the field of aging. Terry served as co-chair of the US Planning Committee for the International Year of Older Persons that took place in 1999. The year was launched, however, on October 1st of 1998 with a theme of Towards a Society for All Ages, with the keynote speech delivered by Secretary General Kofi Annan. In his speech, he said, and I quote, "We live in an age to which many labels have been attached. It is the post-Cold War age, the post-industrial age, the age of the internet, and the age of globalization." He added one more that day, the age of longevity. He went on to say, "A society for all ages does not caricature older persons as dependents, as pensioners. Instead, it sees them as both agent and beneficiaries of development. It seeks balance between supporting dependency and investing in lifelong development." Terry also served on the Independent Expert Committee working to develop the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, MIPA, as we all call it, which marked another milestone, the Second World Assembly on Aging, and then the subsequent adoption of MIPA in 2002. I'm coming now to my end as I focus on this past decade, leading up to 2020. The Millennium Development Goals, 2000 to 2015, made no mention of older persons, but the planning for the follow-up for the Sustainable Development Goals had begun. Next slide, please. Let us watch a brief video with Helen Hamlin, former chair of the NGO Committee on Aging and a fellow UN representative of the IFA. She was invited by AARP to celebrate their first observance of IDOP at their headquarters in Washington, DC, which took place October 1st, 2013. Let's listen to the words of Helen.
Hello, I'm Helen Hamlin. I represent the International Federation on Aging at the United Nations, and I'm very excited and so pleased to be here at AARP headquarters to help celebrate and launch their first International Day of Older Persons in the headquarters. So we're doing a general job. At the United Nations, we're working now on a convention for the human rights of older persons, and we're very much invested with our colleagues and partners in pursuing that with the member states at the UN. For post-2015 has been underway now for almost a year, if not a little more, to learn from the mistakes or the omissions in the Millennium Development Goals. And the most important omission in my eyes and in the eyes of my colleagues is that there was not one word saying aging or elder or older person in those development goals. So our efforts have been mammoth at the current time and for the past 10 to 12 months around making sure that the member states and the people working on the next step will make sure to have older persons included in our language that we're asking them to look at and to incorporate. So it talks about people of all ages, not just older people, because we stress that as older persons, we are very intergenerational. My view is that persons have to be and need to value being interdependent with other age groups as well as our own, intradependent within our age group so that we produce programs and activities and knowledge. Knowledge is very important about issues of aging. For example, we're engaged now in age-friendly communities. And what does that mean? It means that we are trying to enable local governance all over the world, and we have members of age-friendly communities all over the world, to be aware of safety needs of older persons, more aware of elder abuse, which is a terrible issue to be contended with, issues of poverty, issues of urbanization, all of which will subsume older persons. All of us in the aging community reach out to the member states. For example, when we were discussing, and we're going to be discussing it again, the Convention on the Human Rights of Older Persons, many of us in the Committee on Aging, and AARP has played a great role in that, as well as IFA, in visiting the member states on an individual basis. We make appointments. Hopefully we'll meet with ambassadors or meet with the undersecretaries who are in those missions, who are interested in aging or have in their portfolio social service needs, which incorporates from birth to death issues at all levels. So we continue to do that as much as we can. We've done that with the open-ended working group on human rights for older persons, and we've been doing it with the groups that are meeting, the member states that are meeting around the post-2015 program. We want to be in their document. We were not in the Millennium Development Goals at all. And when I was, not I particularly, we invited one of the members of that division to a meeting and we said, how dare you? We are here. Well, it's implied in all of the development goals, which is not good enough because much of the thinking at the UN and in too many other places around the world, people don't exist after a certain age. In some cases, if you're 49 plus, you don't count. If you're 60 plus, you don't count. And that's where elder abuse comes in, where disregard comes in. We're all important.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Helen. 3 weeks ago, I spoke with Helen on her 98th birthday. I reflected with her on the progress we did make with the adoption of Agenda 2030, so that among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 15 contain specific or implied references to older persons. That is progress. Not enough, but it's progress. I think this pandemic will certainly join the major historical events of our time. And as pointed out, that COVID-19 is a human rights issue. Older persons are the main victims of COVID-19, but are not the main agents of its spread. We need to act to ensure equality of all people but particularly for older persons. I would like to close with a quote from Sasha Sidorenko's blog on older persons and COVID-19, and I quote, "Based on the international policy frameworks on aging, such as MIPA, older persons should be seen as contributors to the reestablishment and reconstruction of communities and the rebuilding of the social fabric following emergencies." Yes, this pandemic changes the way we are feeling and addressing aging. It deserves our attention and action to ensure the decade of healthy aging can be realized and recognition that older persons' rights are human rights. The last point to leave you with is Secretary General in embarking on the asking us all a simple question for our future. What if? Thank you.
What if there was, there's plenty of what ifs.
What if we didn't have corruption,
persecuciones o guerras,
HIV,
ageism,
discrimination,
stigma?
ماذا لو فهم الجميع في العالم معنى أن تكون مهاجراً بعيداً عن أهلك، بعيداً عن ناسك، بعيداً عن وطنك؟
I always think, what if my home just disappears? What if my whole country disappears? And what if my daughter never gets to see it?
What if the world was cleaner?
What if my child could grow up in a world where climate change wasn't a constant threat and where cities were pollution-free?
أمنيتي لها خاصة بعدل الفرق بين المدينة وبرات المدينة.
Tous les jours, on voit les villes grandir, on voit un exode rural des populations, et cela vient avec beaucoup de problèmes, des problèmes de logement, des problèmes d'insalubrité, des problèmes de santé publique.
By 2050, globally, there will be more people over the age of 60 than children. So we need to plan for age-friendly cities.
Но это единственным образом можно решить. Один шаг за шагом. There's so many people that have nothing, and there's so few people that have a lot. And you think about inequality. It's so important to understand that we need a world that is more equal.
What if we lived in a world where all that mattered was how we cared about each other?
We're all deserving of the same kind of care and love and health and education. And these are just all basic necessities that we should all have access to.
世界上的贫富差距应该可以减少，而且将会有更多的工作机会给新的一代。
New technology can do things that are completely undreamt of. What if it was used for bringing education to rural areas?
Tout ce que je suis devenu, c'est vraiment cette éducation que j'ai reçue à la base. Et je pense que si moi je peux accéder à cette éducation, tous les enfants du monde doivent avoir accès à ça aussi.
如果全世界一起合作，打造一个共享的网络空间，那么所有人都能够参与数字经济。
¿Qué tal si en el mundo nos escucháramos?
When we bring our minds together, those ideas become innovation.
I think my only what if, out of many what ifs, would be what if every young person was empowered to reach their full potential?
What if the world was a more secure place for young people like me?
Мы все в этом мире временные. Y у нас есть путь выбрать.
Cuando digo que hace falta solidaridad entre países, también es solidaridad entre las personas.
What if all the nations understand that we are so powerful? We should be the instrument of peace. We should be the peace.
What if leaders and communities would understand that they should use dialogue and not conflict to address their differences?
Si c'est possible,
Do I think this is possible? Yes, because I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist.
We need your opinions, your strategies, your ideas for us to be able to deliver better for the people of the world that we must serve.
We can change this game.
It is absolutely essential that you all join the conversation.
Everybody has to contribute. We don't have an option.
Everybody needs to talk. We need to come together.
What would the world be like?
Okay, thank you, Cynthia, for that wonderful presentation. It's really interesting to be able to see and learn about the history of the committee and the day. So we really appreciate that. And it was wonderful to see Helen in all her glory. I'm not sure, Martha, have you now joined us? Okay, I guess not. So I'll continue reading Martha's notes. At this point, we are moving into the keynote section of our event today. And we're very honored to have Ms. Elizabeth Iro, the Chief Nursing Officer of the WHO. 2020 has been named the Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And there's also is the launch of the Decade of Healthy Aging. And our keynote speaker is a nurse and a midwife and has more than 30 years experience in public health and health policy. She recognizes that nurses are important healthcare providers to older persons, and in many cases are older adults themselves, continuing to provide healthcare to transform health policies. Her career began and flourished in the Cook Islands. Her home and her talents brought her to the attention of the Director General of WHO, who 3 years ago appointed her to this role of Chief Nursing Officer. It's a pleasure to share with you this video that Ms. Iro has put together. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm honored to speak to you all on this International Day of Older Persons. 2020 will go down in history as the year that COVID-19 spread across our world. In 2020, the member states of the 73rd World Health Assembly called for 10 years of concerted action to foster healthy aging by endorsing the Decade of Healthy Aging up to 2030. And throughout 2020, we are celebrating the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. So as the Chief Nursing Officer at WHO, I'm delighted to speak to you today and bring these three themes together. COVID-19 is an international public health emergency of unprecedented spread and impact, attacking societies and economies to their core. In response, the 73rd World Health Assembly endorsed the COVID-19 Response Resolution, followed by the WHO COVID-19 Strategic Response. People in the second half of life are bearing the brunt of COVID-19. Older people face a higher risk of serious illness and higher case fatality rates than people in younger age groups. The crude case fatality rate increases in those with underlying conditions that affect immune, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems. Some important intersecting disparities have also emerged based on ethnicity, gender, deprivation, and close quarters living, such as in long-term care facilities. In the context of COVID-19, the decade's vision, action areas, and enablers are now even more crucial. It is also timely to shine the light on nurses. But first, what is healthy aging, and what is a decade of healthy aging? WHO's definition of healthy aging is the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. Functional ability is about having the capabilities to be and do what a person has reason to value, including being able to move around, maintain relationships, meet basic needs, learn, make decisions, and contribute. In 2016, the WHO Global Strategy on Aging and Health was launched. This built on the United Nations Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging in 2002 and aligned to Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development with its 17 goals. The global strategy included 2 periods of action, firstly covering 2016 to 2020 and the second from 2020 to 2030. We are now entering the second period of action as a decade of healthy aging. The full document is publicly available on the WHO website in the 6 official UN languages. The decade's vision is for a world where all people can live a long and healthy life. It represents a new opportunity to make efforts to foster healthy aging. This will be done through 4 prioritized action areas that are strongly interconnected. For many decades, nurses have worked to promote, protect, and maintain health and well-being of populations and respond with necessary interventions in times of ill health or health crisis or emergencies. This contribution can continue well into the later life and beyond retirement. And now with COVID-19, older nurses have stepped up. For example, in Liberia and Sierra Leone, older nurses who have worked through past Ebola epidemics are mentoring younger nurses. In Ireland, many retired nurses and those who had left the profession responded quickly to a government appeal to return to the health and social care workforces or volunteer in their communities with much positive impact. These older nurses highlight the need for a positive narrative in the decade. Older people are not all uniformly vulnerable, needy, sick, patients to be treated and cared for, impaired, helpless, voiceless, and with no autonomy. Most older people do not fit that narrative at all. The decade's first action area relates to changing how we think, feel, and act towards age and aging. The United Nations Secretary General said recently, "No person, young or older, is expendable." Regrettably, COVID-19 has revealed how prevalent ageism is in our societies and the strengths and limitations of responses by governments, civil society, and communities. Efforts to combat ageism across all policies, settings, and practices need to be increased, and we all have a role to play. Nurses can counter ageist language, stereotypes, and discrimination at all levels of the health system and in all settings. This was highlighted in the recent State of the World's Nursing report with the example of Japan. The decade's second action area is developing communities in ways that foster the abilities of older people. Where their role is well established, nurses can be effective advocates for age-friendly policies and practices. They can be allies of local leaders and professionals in other sectors. They can encourage intergenerational connections, communication, and solidarity, which are proving so important in this pandemic. They can look out for older people in financial difficulties, lacking social interaction, and vulnerable to isolation, loneliness, abuse, and neglect. They can initiate appropriate referrals, information, and supports. These are all part of fostering healthy aging through age-friendly environments. The decade's third action area is delivering person-centered integrated care and primary health and services responsive to older people. Nurses are key for connecting older people to appropriate timely information, services, referrals, follow-up, continuity of care, linking the home with health facilities, long-term care facilities, and
Bear with us for a slight technical difficulty. It's just loading. So it appears there's an issue with the video. Could we move on to the next, and perhaps Betty, I'll pass the floor to you.
I believe Martha has joined us now. Is that true?
So let's do a check. I just have to allow her to unmute herself. So Martha, if you are online, and this is our co-chair, so we're, pardon us as we just check. Martha, are you able to unmute?
Okay, where are we here?
Yes, we have you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to the wonders of technology. We're not so wondrous today. Did you, I saw that the film, did the film work? Were you able to show Ms. Eero's film?
Just part of it.
Part of it. So we're going to take from there and go on. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Eero. We're really sorry that we didn't get to see that full video. I did see it in preview, and it was very fun and uplifting to show us the role of nurses, the importance of nurses in our world, and for older people especially. So we're going to take a break here. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our hosts, International Federation on Aging, and our sponsors, AARP and the M&T Bank, along with our co-sponsor, the Group of Friends. The Group of Friends of Older Persons, a very important group. It's a group of member states of the UN, 25 of them at the moment, but growing, who actively support the rights of older persons at the UN and in UN policymaking. You will hear from a representative of that group later in our program. That will be the First Lady of Chile. But now, during our break, we have a special treat for you. The UN Orchestra has put together a special piece under the direction of Predrag Basic, who has made a lovely video set to music by Grieg. And then after that, we have another short video. So we're going to take a break for about 15 minutes, and it is now 10 o'clock. So at 10:15, we'll be back. Be sure to be back in 15 minutes, because we'll be holding an interactive panel discussion among health and aging specialists on what action, they're going to discuss what action is actually needed to achieve healthy aging over the next 10 years. You won't want to miss it.
The United Nations Symphony Orchestra is honored to join in celebrating the International Day of Older Persons. For this occasion, our musicians have contributed their music individually from their homes in preparation of this virtual performance. As staffers and members of the UN community, we understand how all the work of the United Nations depends on the contributions of individuals on behalf of the common cause. Today's International Day comes amid the darkness of a global pandemic that has ravaged entire countries, and our elderly have paid an especially heavy price for this unfolding tragedy. While the great Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg knew nothing about this International Day, he knew a lot about the human spirit and its relation to our natural environment. In our music today, Morning Mood gently guides us from the darkness of the darkest night into the dawning of a new day, reviving our collective memories of the joys of life and the beautiful world in which we live, despite our hardships. Gabriel García Márquez wrote that it is not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing dreams. So, as we listen to Grieg's evocation of the coming of a new dawn, let us continue to dream for all we love and value in this world. Good health, peace, and an end to war, injustice, and inequality. Come join us now. A new dawn awaits.
Fantastic.
Gorgeous.
The United
During the Crimean War, more soldiers died from infection than in battle. Until a nurse introduced sanitary practices still in use today. When the scourge of polio hit the world, it was standard practice to strap down and immobilize patients. Until a nurse discovered that movement and physical therapy had far better results. In the 1950s, jaundice was a leading cause of infant death, until a nurse found that a few hours of sunlight could actually cure the condition. At the dawn of the AIDS epidemic, no one knew how the disease spread. So patients were kept quarantined and alone, until nurses defied convention and embraced them with compassion. During the Ebola outbreak, the disease was thought by many to be too contagious to treat, until a student nurse used what she had on hand: garbage bags and duct tape, to protect herself so she could care for others. And cerebral palsy robbed many patients of their ability to speak, until a nurse gave them back their voices. And I will always be grateful to her.
Okay, thank you very much. Very enjoyable video reminding us of the importance of nurses. And we have take another 5 minutes for a personal break, and we will be back then. For now, we are posting here the list of our sponsors that we thank, for whom we are extremely grateful. So we want to give them recognition here. See you in 5 minutes, or maybe it's 4.5 now.
Very different taste to that. Completely different and completely different.
Thank you all for your patience as we took a brief break, and we'll now move forward with part 2 of today's program. I will just intervene with a short instruction and reminder on some technical considerations for the upcoming panel. During the interactive dialogue, you will be able to view multiple speakers simultaneously using the pin option to simulate a panel experience. Identify the panelists speaking along the top of your screen and click on the 3 dots in the top right corner of their video and click pin in the drop-down menu. You will be able to pin up to 9 speakers. And if at any time you have any technical questions, please post your question in the chat and assistance will be provided to you. And now I pass the floor back to our chair and co-chair, Martha and Betty. And Betty and Martha, I'm just asking you to unmute, please.
Okay, welcome back. As we promised, we've gathered a group of specialists in health, aging, and human rights, because these issues are all interconnected, to discuss over the next hour and a quarter or so just what is needed to ensure healthy aging during the 2020s. As time allows, we'll take questions and comments from the virtual floor, so feel free to post these in the chat box. The discussion will be moderated by Jane Barrett, the Secretary General of the International Federation on Aging, who many of you in the aging community know for her work over many years on behalf of older persons. I will now turn the floor over to Jane, who will introduce the topic and the panelists.
Thank you very much, Martha. And as we pause, I do want to acknowledge the people in the engine room behind this International Day of Older Persons. Never before have I attended an event that has over 350 people. So I congratulate all those people that are translating into French and Spanish, that are in the engine room trying to sort out registrations and bring people into the room, you know, as well as all of those volunteers that have supported the development, as well as the sponsors. I particularly want to acknowledge Andra Stanku, IFA project lead for this project, and Chesley Ryder. You're doing a phenomenal job, so thank you. It's my pleasure to moderate this interactive dialogue, but before I do so, I just would like to make a few remarks. And it has been said before, but I think it's important to pause. We celebrate because it's an important day to celebrate the International Day of Older Persons. But it is a time to acknowledge that over 35 million people have been diagnosed with COVID. At this time, over 1 million people have died. We live in such a fast and furious world that these numbers seem to grow, and we just seem to accept them more and more. 200,000, 300,000, 1 million, 1.1 million. But each and every one of those people that have died, you know, have a family and friends and a community. And all of them have contributed their life experiences, whether it's a 19-year-old or a 99-year-old. And we are all feeling the pain of this pandemic in one way or another. And so it is time to pause and just acknowledge and to recognize that we are all in this together, and we all need to stand up and fight for one another. Because everybody wants tomorrow to be full of promise and future and the sun to shine. And tomorrow is not likely to be that. But perhaps this can be the beginning of where we come together, in one common inclusive agenda. So as I take forward and have the pleasure of introducing our panelists, the common agenda that draws us together, one of them is certainly the decade of healthy aging. Our panelists and discussants today position their remarks in the context of the decade of healthy aging. And specifically, we ask them to think about the actions needed to achieve healthy aging. It's now my great pleasure to introduce each of these eminent experts who have been asked to give a statement of 5 minutes. And then following that statement, we're going to invite 3 discussants in to our coffee table or our Chardonnay table to have a conversation. So starting and in order of the statements that they will present, Peggy Hicks, Director of Thematic Engagement at the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, Sir Michael Marmot, Director, University College London, Institute of Health Equity, UCL Department Epidemiology and Public Health, John K. Shakby, Director of Nursing Redemption Hospital in Monrovia, Liberia, Jean Axios, Senior Vice President for the Global Leadership, AARP International, and Ritu Sadana, Head Aging and Health Unit, World Health Organization. I now hand the floor to Peggy Hicks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thanks so much to the sponsors. I echo all the thanks given at the top. As Jane has noted, we see anniversaries as a time to celebrate, and on the 30th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons, we obviously have much to say about the progress that we've seen in the past 3 decades. But this is really a moment for action, not just for celebration. COVID-19, as has been said, has laid bare the perils of current approaches in which population aging tends to be seen as a problem rather than an opportunity, and the potential of older persons is stifled by pervasive ageism and age discrimination. The devastating toll of the pandemic on older persons should be a wake-up call to the work that needs to be done and needs to be done quickly. COVID-19 has exposed gaps in access to health services, lack of social protection, income insecurity, lack of autonomy and full participation, and the perils that older persons face from violence, neglect, and abuse. At the same time, it has brought to the fore underlying age discrimination, with people at times putting into words the often unspoken sentiments about the value of older persons, and some people acting in ways that reflect a profound disregard for older persons' lives. The impact and extent of ageism we face is rarely fully acknowledged. For me, this is highlighted by the fact that even as an older person, we sometimes engage ourselves in ageism and age discrimination. Many of us recoil from being called an older person, and the employers that won't hire older workers are sometimes themselves older persons. A key challenge here is that ageism is so prevalent and widely accepted, we tend not to recognize it as an issue of a human rights abuse, of age discrimination, and a violation of rights. As countries seek to recover from the pandemic, older persons will most certainly continue to face different forms of ageism. Older workers may become a target for workforce reductions, given the economic crisis. If we recognize that access to testing, protective equipment, and treatment has at times been deprioritized during this pandemic for older persons, is it hard to imagine that older persons may have more difficulty accessing vaccines when they become available? That is why the vision and ambition of the Decade of Healthy Aging as a platform for global collaboration is so critical. It brings together the diverse sectors and stakeholders in a whole of society approach that is absolutely necessary. As a key pillar of the decade, we can all work together in 4 ways to address the pandemic of ageism. First, we need to shift our narratives around older persons to an approach anchored in full respect for their rights and dignity. Older persons are an incredibly diverse group. Assumptions that older persons are frail or dependent are not only inaccurate, they are harmful. Second, shifting our narratives requires a deeper understanding of how we think, feel, and act towards people on the basis of their age and the harmful effects on the health and well-being of older people that causes, supported by data and evidence. Third, we need to take on structural barriers to better protect the human rights of older persons at national and at the international level. This includes strengthening legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms and implementing programs to reduce ageism in various sectors, including in health, employment, and education. The decade should generate wider support and impetus and acceleration towards developing a new international human rights convention on the rights of older persons. Finally, we need to foster intergenerational solidarity, recognizing that far from being part of the problem, older persons are an essential element of the solutions we so urgently need today. We look forward to engaging with all of you in moving forward with the decade of healthy aging. This is a moment that we all need to seize together to ensure the health, well-being, social and economic inclusion, and human rights of older persons everywhere. Thanks very much.
And thank you very much, Peggy. You've touched on some really poignant points in terms of we need to tackle structural barriers, as well as considering, you know, the question for me, and we can talk about it in our round table, you know, have we been really normalizing ageism, you know, in self-identifying as well as the structural, you know, elements, and also shifting the narrative. And I think that is really based on a deeper understanding through evidence. So we thank you. We now move on to Sir Michael Marmot and his statement. So Sir Michael, are you with us?
I am.
Thank you.
I hope I'm completely with you.
Yes, you are, sir.
The major challenge facing the world today is inequalities. The second is climate change, but I want to talk about inequalities. And the pandemic exposes the underlying inequalities in society and amplifies them. Let's examine them. There are inequalities within and between countries. And a key aim of healthy aging is enhancing capabilities. And I would argue reducing the inequalities in those capabilities. The UNDP Human Development Report for 2019 looked at 2 kinds of capabilities, what they called basic capabilities and enhanced capabilities. So for example, life expectancy at birth was labeled a basic capability, and life expectancy at 70 an enhanced capability. And what they reported on, if you look at countries at low, medium, high, and very high development, we see a convergence of the inequalities, a convergence between those groups of countries in basic capabilities, but a divergence in enhanced capabilities. So life expectancy at birth, the inequalities between those 4 groups is converging. Life expectancy at 70 is diverging. The inequality is increasing. Primary education, the inequalities are decreasing. Tertiary education, the inequalities are increasing. Mobile cellular subscription, mobile phones, the inequalities are decreasing. Fixed broadband subscription, the inequalities are increasing. I think surely our aim globally has to be enhancing these enhanced capabilities for older people, and that means action through the life course. 12 months ago, to the date, 1st of October last year, we published the Commission of the Pan American Health Organization on Equity and Health Inequalities in the Americas. One of our chapters was devoted to older people, but the general framework, exactly as Peggy has just mentioned, was looking at structural barriers. The Global Commission, the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health, spoke of inequity in power, money, and resources. And they're key for older people. And we looked at inequities by socioeconomic position, gender, ethnicity, disability, sexuality, and migration status. So we took an intersectional approach. And we had 3 classes of recommendations. Create the conditions for active and engaged aging, with society valuing the contributions of older people. That means action by local government and civil society to create age-friendly cities, reduce social isolation, and multi-sector partnerships to look at housing, transport, and the like. The second was pretty basic: increased provision of pensions through government subsidies, particularly for those most at risk of having no income at later life. And the third was increase the focus of the healthcare system on prevention and promotion of healthy, active aging. We really have the evidence to make a huge difference. The evidence is clear. We can make a huge difference to the capability of older people to live lives of dignity and good health. The question now is whether we will rise to the political challenge and do it. Social justice demands that we do.
So Michael, that's almost a call for action, isn't it? You know, that
I hope so.
you really put it to us today. You know, across those few minutes, you know, words that pop out to me is that the inequalities are both exposed and amplified, and within countries and between countries. And this concept of enhanced capabilities. And so I think that we're going to draw some of those out in our discussion. What strikes me also is that these words, life course approach, we often see them in our policy documents now. I think of the immunisation strategy for WHO and MIPA and the decade, and we need to operationalise those concepts, you know, at a local level. So thank you very much for your statement of intention and the call to action. And we'll be joining with you in a few minutes. I now invite John K. Shackby, Director of Nursing in Liberia. And John, you're really at the coalface in terms of primary integrated care. So would you like to come forward and make your statement? Are you with us, John?
Yes, I'm with you.
Wonderful, thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my experience with aging, caring for the aged. In Liberia, we usually treat our older people through the primary healthcare system. And we do not have specific programs for older people to go through when they come to the hospital. And so we use the primary healthcare system to treat our older people. And but the care is mainly centered around the needs of the patient, the needs of the older person. And we also do allow them to also participate in their care, in the decision-making of their care. And so the older people do participate in the decision-making, and they also are giving patient-centered care. because the needs of the older people are different from one person to another. So as they come to the hospital, they are given the treatment according to the situation. Again, we also consider the elderly so much that in our facility, we give them priority when they come to the hospital for care. And so the older people are considered as a major priority because at that age, they are weaker than the younger people. And so we gave them the priority when they come to seek care in our facility. One thing from listening to all the program, one thing I want the UN to do is to ensure that the UNIDOP establish an office in Liberia so that at least we would have a place to liaise for the care of the older people. Now, we do not have such opportunity here in Liberia, and so we would like to have such opportunity where the older people will be cared for adequately. We need our support, and we also hope that the new Redemption Hospital, there will be a unit within that hospital for the older people so that they will be properly well cared for. Our population is mainly of youth because as you may know, our life expectancy is very, very short. And so we have very few older persons, but these older people need the care that is necessary. And it, as I said, should be patient-centered, and it also should be based on the needs of that patient. Thank you.
And I will unmute myself. Thank you very much for being with us today, because I know that the internet is sometimes a little bit wobbly in Liberia. So you've come through very, very clear. And your message is very clear. You called out UNDP because you need an office in Liberia, in Monrovia. You know, yeah. But we also must remember something that you said, you know, that you mainly speak, that, you know, treat youth because the life expectancy is so low. And so we need to take that into consideration and build programs that enable older people to live a quality life and with longer life expectancy. So we thank you for being with us today from Liberia, and stay with us, all right?
I'm here.
Good, good. We now move on to Jean Axios, Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership, AARP. And Jean, AARP has really been mentioned many times across, you know, this program, and IFA acknowledges that in many respects we were born out of, you know, the AARP. So we hand the floor over to you, Jean.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for your leadership and for all that you're doing. And I just want to give a huge shout out and to congratulate the full team, as you indicated, who's behind the scenes, who's helping to ensure that today is a huge success. So my tremendous gratitude to the entire team. We at AARP want to celebrate and recognize, and to your point, Jane, also acknowledge and recognize and pause in terms of exactly where we find ourselves today. AARP's commitment to the United Nations goes back to 1985 when we first joined the UN NGO Committee on Aging and opened our office in New York. I want to acknowledge my colleague Erica Dora, who's been doing such amazing work in New York, working across the United Nations with Amal and many of her team as well. In 1987, we received and obtained a consultative status with the United Nations. And for over 60 years more broadly as an organization, we've been committed to really advancing the wealth and health of older adults, particularly in the US, but also more broadly For those who are not familiar with AARP, we are the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We're dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they actually age. As Jane indicated, we've been working very closely from the very beginning because we understand and see the value of international and global cooperation and collaboration. It's critically important as we start to think about what are the solutions and approaches that are needed to empower people around the world to pursue their goals and their dreams and to really make the most of a longer and healthier life. So to this end, we work very closely with international institutions like the United Nations, like civil society, and the private sector to identify emerging topics around the world, to challenge the status quo, to engage with other global stakeholders that can become potential allies and thought partners in changing how the world sees aging. This year's theme, pandemics, how do they change how we address age and aging, is extremely relevant. As we celebrate longevity and aging, we also must stop to recognize the challenges we all have faced this year with COVID-19, the economic crisis, as well as the racial and social unrest that has transpired across the globe and has elevated an issue around equity, as Sir Michael just mentioned. It's fair to say in the last 6 months or so, our world has been turned upside down. Now more than ever, we need a global collaboration and information sharing among nations, regions, communities, and organizations. In fact, back in May of this year, the United Nations noted that the fatality rate was 5 times higher than the global average, particularly for older adults, as relates to COVID-19, including the lack of access to healthcare, discrimination, and much more. The World Health Organization found that in many countries, more than 40% of COVID-19 related deaths have been in long-term care facilities, with figures as high as up to 80% in some of the high-income countries, the United States included. In addition, it's fair to note that, particularly with regards to long-term care, that this is not necessarily new, that this crisis, particularly in long-term care, is not necessarily new. It's a decades-old problem, and older people who need care, particularly people of color, have been marginalized. In fact, the World Health Organization noted in a recent report that a lot of the issues that we're seeing in light of COVID-19 with respect to the long-term care systems across many countries are long-standing problems, and they all have a lot of things in common, whether it's underfunding, lack of accountability, fragmentation, poor coordination between health and long-term care, and an undervalued workforce. However, I think we're at an inflection point. On one hand, we can preserve the status quo with a patchwork approach, whereby inequities continue to fester and harm the most vulnerable among us, or we can be bold and courageous and reimagine our current systems and rebuild in ways that expand opportunities for all. COVID-19, as has been noted earlier, has only exacerbated what have been long-standing and structural issues. And the danger we face is to think that these issues are so overwhelming that it paralyzes us to act. In fact, I think we need to be expansive in our solutions, and those solutions will require collaboration across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. In addition, as we think of particularly with regards to the pandemic, it does create an opportunity for us to be intentional in how we redesign our long-term care systems. And that this actually should include the following dimensions. We at AARP within the Public Policy Institute, our colleagues within the Public Policy Institute recently released our major scorecard, which actually ranks and assesses the performance of long-term care systems across states in the United States. And our vision for a high-performing system includes 5 dimensions. One is around affordability and access, meaning that consumers should easily be able to find the service that they need, and there should be a safety net for those who cannot afford services. There should also be a choice of setting and provider. One of the things I would mention is the fact that, as we're seeing, particularly with the long-term care facilities, that this is a problematic issue. But I also think it's an opportunity for us to think about how do we expand choices for consumers. We know that the vast majority of people would love to receive long-term care in their homes and communities, yet in many states and some countries, it's heavily institutionalized. We've done some research that shows that for every 1 person in a long-term care facility, we can take care of 3 people in a community. So thinking about options and to provide consumers with choices is not only beneficial, it's also cost effective. And clearly the issues of quality is at the forefront of what we're seeing with COVID-19 today. So really thinking about to what extent can we ensure that services maximize positive outcomes and consumers are treated with dignity and respect, and that their personal preferences are honored. We cannot think think about long-term care without thinking about the millions of family caregivers that are on the front lines that are supporting them on an everyday basis. So we really need to ensure that the system of the future puts the individual and the families at the center, and that the needs of family caregivers are not only assessed, but they're also addressed. And then finally, in order to address fragmentation, we also have to think about the opportunity to coordinate and ensure effective transitions between our long-term care systems and our healthcare systems. Again, let's put the consumer at the center. Thank you so much, Jane. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And thank you very much, Jean. You know, what you've really done is helped connect, you know, the words of John in Monrovia that was talking about, you know, person-centered. You know, what's interesting is Sir Michael actually really gave us, you know, the opportunity to consider the environment, what was happening in our environment, mentioning age-friendly cities and communities, you know, and while Peggy really put the stake in the sand by mentioning, you know, the importance of legal frameworks and the Convention for the Rights of Older People, which I'm sure will happen in my lifetime. So thank you. We move right on now to an important speaker from the World Health Organization. And I know, Ritu, you know, you've been very busy today in Geneva, so we thank you very much for coming online and presenting your statement. So Ritu Sedana, co-author of the Baseline Report on the Decade of Healthy Aging and head of the Aging and Health Unit, WHO. Thank you very much, Ritu.
Well, hi, Jane, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to give a preview of the upcoming WHO Baseline Report for the Decade of Healthy Aging. The report was mandated by WHO member states within the Global Strategy on Aging and Health, and it highlights that optimizing functional ability is a key to healthy aging. Now, over the next 10 years, the Decade Action Plan gives us all an opportunity to work together towards this goal, as Elizabeth Iro mentioned in her talk, with older people themselves at the center of this plan. So given these mandates, the report addresses three questions. Where are we now? What improvements can we expect by 2030, given our current context? And how can we accelerate impact on older people's lives? So for the first question, where are we in 2020? The report provides a first-time baseline on the levels and distribution of healthy aging. We analyzed data from more than 50 countries and included more than 150,000 men and women aged 60 and older in our results. One key finding is that adults in every age group are diverse. You know, we've been saying this for years, but now we have global evidence that documents it. Many older people ages 90 and over have the same physical and mental capacities as those at age 60 to 64. This underlines that declines in capacity are not inevitable. But the other side of diversity is that not all older adults have the same opportunities, earlier in life or right now. We can see that higher levels of education across all age groups and countries are associated with better abilities and capacities. Gender differences also matter, with women being less likely to meet some of their basic needs than men, particularly at the oldest ages. Echoing Sir Michael, action to level up healthy aging for all people across the life course is really vital for health equity. Now, for the second question, what improvements could we expect by 2030? The report documents progress reflecting commitments in the Decade Action Plan. The good news is that 10 out of the 10 progress indicators see some improvements over the last 2 years. This includes indicators for the 4 priority areas in the action plan. But when we project the rate of progress to the next 10 years, we estimate that only one of these indicators is expected to be achieved by all countries in 2023. That's when our next progress report will come out. That's just not good enough. I'm just going to say that again. That is not good enough. We really need to do better and faster if we want to improve impact on older people's lives by 2030. So that actually leads to the third question the report addresses. How can we accelerate impact? This includes what WHO could do. For example, supporting countries to roll out integrated care for older people, of course, working closer with Cochrane Campbell Global Aging Partnership to address evidence gaps, and of course, UN agencies to advocate for age disaggregated data and build up multi-sectoral initiatives. But it will be by working together on the ground in countries and communities that will really determine real impact. So we've collected examples and evidence from around the world to show what can be done to optimize functional ability, not only to meet basic needs, but also to show that older people can and are contributing to society. This report refers to a first ever review of lifelong learning programs for older adults. It also highlights community-based projects. One example is Green and Growing. It's about gardening and meeting people that is co-designed by older adults. But learning from these examples and putting evidence into practice are not only about the what, but also the how to organize, finance, evaluate, replicate, and potentially scale up similar programs that establish meaningful connections across older people and younger people and foster healthy aging. So I just want to end saying we have other good news, that we're not starting from scratch. We can learn from countries and of course from civil society. For example, Mexico, Vanuatu, and Qatar are all reorienting national programs on aging towards healthy aging. You know, and as our Director General just earlier today said, collaborating and acting together with older adults is the only way forward. Thank you, Jane.
And thank you very much, Rutu. That really sets almost us in action, doesn't it? You've really emphasized the importance of data and the importance of this roadmap, but if also given us some really down-to-earth examples of what it looks like to be part of this common agenda in action. So thank you. We now move to inviting 3 more guests to our round table. And so please welcome Dr. Bei Wu, gerontologist, professor in global health and director for global health and aging research at New York University. Dr. Tara Cortez, executive director and professor at the Hartford Institute for Geriatric Nursing at New York University, and Dr. Marbel Bianco, member of the PAHO UCL Commission on Gender and Ethics. So welcome to our round table. And the way that this is going to work is that I'm going to pose a question to one of the discussants, and then I'm going to pivot and ask some of the panelists to comment on that response. So first of all, I would like to go to Bei. Are you with us, Bei?
Yes, Jane, I'm here. Yep.
Okay, a warm welcome to our round table to celebrate IDOP. So, Bei, you've done a lot of work on social isolation, and it seems to me that that's one of the big catchwords, you know, that we've been using, not only through the pandemic, but way before that. Social isolation, marginalisation, the loneliness of older people that leads to acute admissions. Could you make a bit of a comment about social isolation in the context of this pandemic?
Thank you, Jane, for the invitation. I would like to point out.
I'm sure Bei is going to come back with us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Start again, Bei.
Yes, they're also actually vulnerable to a second public health crisis, which is social isolation. Social isolation and the loneliness are common problems facing older adults around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly exacerbated this problem. So social isolation are likely to become major risk factors that affect older adults' health outcomes, including many chronic diseases and even mortality. So we actually need to leveraging the COVID-19 crisis to elevate the mental health care needs of our aging population, to address the issue of social isolation. issues of loneliness in healthcare systems, as well as the community settings and family settings. We need to use technology to combat social isolation. Also, more importantly, that we need to encourage older adults' social connection. Older adults can engage in social connection with their families, community organizations, nursing home staff, and importantly, their peers. As I heard from our panelists that talk about older adults' contributions, they certainly can make a huge contribution in this area to make our actual peers more social connected.
Are you with us, Faye?
Our family, and yep.
Okay.
And together we can combat this global public health issue. Thank you, Jane.
Okay, Faye, I just want to pivot to Peggy Hicks for a moment. Are you there, Peggy?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Look, Peggy, I just want to pivot because there's something that Bay said, and she said we can leverage what's going on in the pandemic in the context of positioning the needs of older people. And I wonder whether that's a good strategy, you know, because we're talking about it a lot, aren't we? You mentioned that ageism has really been brutally exposed, you know, in our environment. How can we positively advocate in this time of the pandemic around the rights of older people without seeming to be opportunistic?
Well, maybe as a human rights person, I shouldn't say this, but I would just urge everyone not to worry about being opportunistic. I mean, lives are at stake, human rights are at stake. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic for these issues to be brought to the forefront. But now that they are in the forefront, we really have to take advantage of it and use the discussions that have emerged. And, you know, there are so many people that I've heard from who have experienced this, the loss that they feel from social isolation of themselves, but also of their parents and their loved ones in different ways. And I do think that it cuts through. It gives people a direct understanding of what we've been talking about for a long time and creates opportunities that should be leveraged to really look at what the issues are. And I have to say, we're doing this on human rights across the board. When people are told that, you know, washing your hands is so important, and we know that, you know, several billion people don't have access to clean water, you know, it gives us an opportunity. So I think we have to just recognize that this is something that's been long in coming, and that now that the door is open, we need to push it open as far as possible to put these issues in the forefront.
All right, pushing the door open. Thank you. Ritu, you were nodding. So would you like to also make a comment about this?
Well, I think that there's many different things that we can do. And clearly assembling the good lessons and understanding how people have become innovative. I think that wonderful video shown earlier on how nurses have come up with ideas and put them in practice. And then it's not just common sense, but then it's evaluated and then it's scaled up. So I know that my colleagues in WHO who are working, for example, on long-term care, I think the issue is that they have seen very clearly that the weaknesses are things that we need to actually address immediately. And we don't need to wait any longer. And I think now we have to use this opportunity, as Peggy pointed out. And we've had shame in the past by not doing what we needed to do. This is now the moment where we must do what we need to do.
And I just want to, that's very helpful, Ritu. I also want to acknowledge the work of Islani from WHO in the Integrated Care of Older People, ICOPE, you know, a really important, you know, body of work that I know that you know, you've been using, and also many countries around the world. I'd like to now call on Dr. Tara Cortez. Tara, you know, within the pandemic, but before that, the impact of chronic diseases and older people impacts many, many health issues. You know, vaccination is one of them. Could you comment about COVID-19, older people and chronic disease? And then I'm going to ask Sir Michael to make a comment.
I just unmuted myself. Thank you, Jane. I think the panel, the speakers, and also the chat box has highlighted some of what you just brought out. I think a lot of this is due to an inadequate and unprepared workforce, and that is something we need to focus on. The global impact of COVID-19 highlighted the shortage of nurses and other personnel. And as our globe grows older, we're only going to need healthcare workers more. We need a global collaborative effort to prepare clinicians, educators, researchers, and direct caregivers. Those family caregivers, the paid and unpaid, are so important. We also need a workforce that's prepared to provide the healthcare that's age appropriate. This means recognizing the uniqueness of caring for an older population and providing person-centered care. Healthcare for an 80-year-old is simply not the same as the healthcare for a 50-year-old. We need a workforce that understands physical, cognitive, and functional changes, how to assess them, how to address them, and how to help people live to their fullest potential. We also need a workforce that understands and supports a person-centered care. The workforce must ask each person what matters to them as they age and respect their wishes. This would be a workforce that defies ageism and provides healthcare with respect, dignity, and individuality.
So look, thank you, Tara. And you know, it speaks to the very issue of capacity as well, doesn't it, Sir Michael? You know, how do we manage? Over to you, sir. You unmute yourself, Sir Michael.
I thought perhaps you could hear me while I was muted, but
Well,
maybe not.
No, I knew what you were talking about because I read.
Well, I was talking about social determinants of health, whether I was muted or unmuted. So not just the healthcare system. I tried to give you a global perspective in my 5 minutes. Forgive me if I focus for a moment on the UK because we have good data.
Good.
When we look at the social gradient in COVID-19 mortality, so the social gradient classifying areas of residence by degree of deprivation, the more deprived the area, the higher the mortality from COVID-19. It looks almost the same as the social gradient in all-cause mortality. In other words, the causes of the inequalities in all causes, which are largely NCDs, to come back to your question, the causes of the inequalities in NCDs and the causes of the inequalities in COVID-19 overlap to considerable degree. So we have to address the inequalities in health more generally. And one big question that comes up, the whole world is going through an economic crisis because of the pandemic. Do we have money to do any of this? I noted that there are 643 billionaires in the United States. Their wealth increased by 29% from the 18th of March. That's $845 billion. So at a time when 50 million Americans lost their jobs, 643 billionaires saw their wealth increase by $845 billion. I can scarcely credit what I'm about to say next. That's $4.7 billion a day. Do we have enough money to do some of the things that I'm talking about? I think there's a lot of money sloshing about. It's just not very well distributed. So we need to be if we want to address inequalities in COVID-19, if we want to address inequalities in health in older people, we have to address inequalities in society.
You know, that figure, Sir Michael, will stay with me. And I'm quite speechless, to be perfectly honest, because just a few days ago, we had the pleasure of talking with someone from UNFPA from Moldova, and he said that 80% of people in Moldova could not afford to buy a mask. And so, you know, this is the situation, you know, that we're dealing with, and we are dealing with it. So I just want to move to John in Liberia. You know, we're talking about healthcare workers, John, and then I'd like to go to Jean to get a contrast. You know, talk with us about healthcare workers in Liberia and what they're really confronting, you know, in normal circumstances, but now in COVID.
Thank you again. Full screen.
You with us, John?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I wanted to go to full screen. Yeah. Okay. So, health workers in Liberia are going through some difficulties, very serious difficulties, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is not easy. The issue of supplies is one major problem that we have, because getting the supplies regularly is sometimes challenging. And but the health workers, the nurses, the doctors, the physician assistant, the lab technician, they are all committed to working for our people. And COVID-19 has not actually been an obstacle for that. We have the nurses being committed and working on a regular basis to ensure that our patients are cared for. For instance, at the Redemption Hospital, we have the triage, where we usually identify the COVID-19 patients when they are brought in, and then they are immediately isolated and sent to the treatment center. But the challenging thing is sometimes we have limited, even the mask. And in the country, I think we only have about 2 or 3 ventilators, but we are grateful that COVID-19 has not been so severe in the country as it is in other countries.
Okay, that's very helpful, John. I'm just turning now to you, Jean, and you know, it was really aspirational. You know, you were talking about reimagining, you know, long-term care and being bold and being courageous. But I worry about the austerity measures that are going to impact the poorest of the poor, who will pay the highest price in our society. You know, what could AARP do, you know, in that context? Because you are a formidable organization when it comes to advocacy. So how can you know, you step forward, not you, but you know, you collectively, and make that statement when dollars are coming off those much needed services for older people?
Well, Jane, thank you for that powerful question. There's a couple of things I would like to respond to. One is to John's points about the frontline workers. I do think there's some commonalities, particularly within the context of direct care workers within the US. And direct care workers are those who are on the front lines every day, providing support to residents in long-term care facilities, adult daycare, and other settings. And each and every day, they're having to make a very tough choice that some of us are not having to make. And that is, should I leave my home and get exposed to potentially the COVID infection rates, with the idea that I will be getting some form of quote unquote minimum wage? And I think that
What's the minimum wage, Jane?
It likely varies, but it's less than, depending on the state, but you're talking about less than $10 an hour in many cases, depending on where you actually live. And these are low wage workers, oftentimes people of color, immigrants, and mostly women. So we have to kind of think about, to the points around and addressing equity and inequalities, we have to also think about our workforce and exactly the workforce of the future. Similar to what John indicated, is that many of these direct care workers have not received the protective gear and the resources that they need in order to be able to safely provide care in some of these long-term care facilities. So we do have to think about, and AARP has been on the front lines advocating very strongly for ensure that direct care workers are receiving those resources that they need, whether that's protective gear, whether that is hazard pay, really need to think about the whole ecosystem with regards to the future workforce that's taking care of the older adult population. So part of it is advocacy. The other thing I would just also mention, Jane, to your point, and I think this is critically important to note, is around what are some of the economic arguments. We do know that particularly many states in some countries will be experiencing some very tough budgetary issues, particularly as we start to recover from this significant global pandemic. Well, I do think that particularly within the context of long-term care, going back to some of the points I made earlier, that when you look at the cost of long-term care, particularly in the US, in the United States, the cost of a nursing home is over $100,000 a year. The cost for assisted living is roughly around $45,000 a year. And then to get someone to come into your home and provide 30 hours of care, roughly is around $35,000 a year. Just look at those numbers. When you look at the average household income of someone over the age of 65 in the US, it's drastically less than that. So the cost of long-term care in the US is expensive, and millions of families advocating for is really to think about how is care being delivered, particularly through public policy. And what we know is the fact that, at least in the United States, you're entitled to get nursing home care should you qualify. However, to get care in your home, it's optional, meaning the fact that states don't have to offer you that. And it depends on the number of slots that are available, particularly in that state. So there's a disincentive between what we know consumers want, which is to receive this care in their homes and communities, relative to what the policies are. And as I indicated before, for every one person in a nursing home, you could take care of 3 people in the community. So we do have an opportunity here as we start to redesign and to really think more intentional about how do we align consumer preference also with consumer choice that is more cost effective. So that's just one area of advocacy that we're pushing.
Yeah.
And then just finally, real quickly, I do want to highlight the point that Peggy made earlier about now's the time to really use this as an opportunity, particularly about the value of older adults in this country. We did an analysis that found that age discrimination actually hurts and stifles our economic growth.
Sure. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to use Peggy's analogy, which was, now's the time to open the door, right? And I think we need to stop thinking about opportunities. This is what we must do versus this is an option to do. Yeah, well, now I'm turning now to Dr. Marbel Bianco, and I know, Marbel, you worked, I believe, on the commission with Sir Michael, and thank you, Sir Michael. You've got a bit of a fan club in the chat box, so thank you for putting. Do you have a Twitter feed as well? We could put that up there, or everybody likes your comments, Sir Michael, so thank you. We now turn to Dr. Marbel Bianco. Marbel, I would like to talk with you about older women in the context of, the gender issues in the context of COVID. Could you speak to that, please? And thanks, Sir Michael.
Thank you so much. And of course, I can speak about the inequalities that elderly women, we are suffering, specifically in developing countries, but not only developing countries, because as we listened before, the problems are worldwide. First of all, in the study we did with Professor Marmot, we studied specifically the cross-cutting issues among ethnicity and gender issues. And of course, gender, and specifically women, we are having low social protection measures when we are elderly. Many times we are receiving the pensions due to our husband work. When they die, so we receive the pensions, not by the women themselves work. So this is a lower amount of money. And of course, the services and the access to services are very more poor. than used to be for the other population. So when we think, and as they were said, in the access to health care, so the healthcare access for women, elderly women in developing countries, and with increase of poverty due to COVID, we are suffering less capacity to reach health services, but not only health services. Now, elderly women couldn't afford in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to afford to buy their meals. Not only, and if you think how much is the cost of the medicines on drugs, this is impossible. So they need to choose what are they going to buy with the small pensions money. Are they going to buy meals to survive, or are they going to have medicines? So this is the reality we are living now in developing countries and in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I think in most of the North America also. So the problem here now is how we afford the inequalities. The inequalities now COVID put there and make it so strong that we couldn't say they didn't exist. But as many of you mentioned before, how we are going to pay for that? All the countries, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, our countries are really in an economical crisis. With this pandemic, we lost and we decreased the income for the countries. So meanwhile, the government wants to have increased the pensions and what we asked before, now they couldn't afford. Are we going to have some way of global cooperation? Are we going to be able to have that? And how is it going to be distributed? Because we know in most of the country, also in developing countries, the gap between rich and poor with the pandemic increase. So now those in the top, more rich, are more rich, and most of us in the back of the structure, we have less money and we are really in poverty. And some of our elderly women are now in our region really under the not only poverty, but also really extreme poverty. So this is something that we need to consider. And of course, we need to review our economical and production model, because if not, the inequalities are going to increase. And this is something that we need to reconsider. But the problem is we have very few time. We didn't see any reaction from the more rich country or more developed countries. So how we are going to obtain some of these possibilities? How we can? Is WHO able to do something?
Marbel, you know, your statement and your questions are big questions. And they while you're talking about older women, they actually go beyond that also. And I think that, you know, countries of the world coming together, you know, are grappling with, you know, these very issues. But I think, as Jean has said, and all the speakers, you know, there are a number of big ticket items that are population issues, you know, as well as, you know, layers of jeopardy for older people. I know there's lots of questions coming into the question box, and I just want to let you know that we will gather those questions and see whether we can get responses from the speakers today, because we have 15 minutes towards the end. And what I'm going to ask the speakers, and that's the first 5 speakers, is to give their closing message now. And if we have a few minutes left over, we'll take a couple of questions. If you're comfortable with that, I'm going to start from Ritu Sadana. Ritu, would you like to, and the idea here is we've had so much rich conversation across the last couple of hours. And so I've asked the speakers to give, what is their takeaway message that they want delegates at this important meeting to take away. So Ritu, would you like to be able to kick off? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'll try to mention a couple of different things, particularly given what other people have said. One is that we should, in our drive for universal health coverage, we're pushing on the service side, but we need to push on the financing side that it's fair and equitable as well. And one of the indicators I mentioned that we said countries have committed to includes having legal frameworks and sustainable financing mechanisms for long-term care. And exactly as Jean pointed out, not long-term care restricted to institutions, but at home or in communities and only when needed in institutions. So we have that accountability mechanism to come back to countries to discuss to what extent they have a national policy in this area. I also want to say that although I mentioned we have 150,000 older adults in the analysis we did, in reality, we had very little comparable data on capacities and abilities and none on environments on older adults. So we need to also push for core data so that we can actually monitor healthy aging across the life course. This is really important. It's not about collecting lots and lots of data, but ensuring we have that minimum. And I just want to kind of end with a positive note, because we all need positive notes right now, I think, as well. And, we're saying that older adults need to be engaged at every stage. There's terrific examples around the world where that's actually happening, where we're aligning older adults' leadership and participation with the political commitment and the evidence that, this can actually work. It's that triangle that we need to be able to move forward. And just to say, there's like a terrific example from Singapore on their silver generation offices, where they've used data, they've coordinated across stakeholders, they have older adults as ambassadors, and older adults aren't just participating, they're actually the decision makers, they're the ones in control of organizing and delivery of the program and activities. So I think there's also examples not only from high income countries or high resources places. So this is what we also need to search out and see how we can appropriately support and replicate these type of wonderful programs in other settings. So
thank you very much, Ritu, and thank you for your work on the report and all that you do with WHO. So Dean, send us away with some messages. One message.
Well, thanks again, Jane, and to the entire panel. As I indicated before, long-term care is everybody's business. It's tied to healthcare. It affects individuals, it affects families, employers, communities, and our broader society. So countries would not be able to fully prevent, reduce, eliminate the spread of this pandemic without fully addressing the state of their long-term care systems. I've heard many people in the past couple of weeks say it's time for us to get back to normal. And I just want to challenge all of us, particularly with regards to how are we defining normal? Because as you've heard today, and Sir Michael even spoke to this, that normal, particularly in the past, really meant that you have to acknowledge and recognize that normal excluded many and that disparities and inequality were commonplace. So as we start to reimagine and build a future that is more equitable, we need to also think about the fact that we need to reduce and eliminate many of the inequalities that we see in order to really live and ensure that every individual, every older adult across the globe has the opportunity to live that longer, healthier, and more productive life. Thanks very much, Jane. That's uplifting, but also with a stamp of realism. So thank you. Don Shakpi, your takeaway message, sir.
Yeah, my takeaway message, there is a great opportunity, and I'm happy to be part of this, but I will urge the UN family to consider the third world countries to provide support for the aging. Actually, if it is left with only the government to do some of these things for the aging, then I think we will not get there soon. The inequality will continue. And so we need a support. We need a support of the UN family so as to take care, because the population of Liberia is young because people are not reaching more than 70 years old because the support is not there. The inequality is so huge that some people are not able to even provide for their family. And so we need the support that the UN family can provide for the aging in Liberia.
And thank you, John. And that also includes civil society organisations. So, you know, IFA looks forward to having some conversations with you. So thank you. So Michael.
My take-home message is listen to Jean. Let me amplify that. If we look before the pandemic crashed upon us, most countries, unfortunately, most countries had increasing inequalities in health. I find it much easier to find the countries where inequalities in health were increasing than to find those where it was decreasing. And added, I said it at the beginning, added to that, the climate crisis. We do not want to recover the status quo. As we think of emerging from the pandemic and building back better, the status quo ante was not desirable. We don't want to go back to that. We should take this as a possibility to build something better. On Thursday evenings, as we went out and applauded healthcare workers, and we all clapped on our doorsteps for healthcare workers, and I wondered how many people were clapping for the CEO of big corporations, how many people were clapping for the bankers, how many people were clapping for the hedge fund managers. And when we think about the care workers, and we think about the drivers, and the supermarket checkout people, and we realize who was keeping our societies functioning, and we don't reward them. So as we think about building back better, let's try and learn some lessons from this pandemic. Who is actually vital to keeping our societies going? How do we make sure they have adequate training, adequate rewards for what they do? And we think about a life of dignity for the older members of our society, and all done in the context of sustainable health equity.
Thank you very much, Sir Michael. Sustainable health equity. We lead into Peggy Hicks. Your last messages?
Thanks, Jane. I realize that following Sir Michael is probably a bad move because he said everything so eloquently. But I think the point that he made, I think, leads directly into the three short things I wanted to say. One is that when we think about participation, and Ritu made this point so broad, so importantly about having older people participate and have their voices represented, it is not just because that's the right thing to do, because it's the fair thing to do, it's because they have a right to do it. It's because we need their voices to be able to succeed in confronting these challenges and to make the progress that we need in addressing them. So it's also the most effective thing to do. Secondly, we need the data and evidence, and I was so glad for Ritu's comments on the work that's already being done. But the more we can document both the gaps and the problems and the issues, and Sir Michael has said a lot on that front as well, the more we will be able to make the case that allows us to move these issues forward. And the final point I want to leave you with is about needing to accelerate. This process has to go faster. And, you know, I'm not on the tech side, I'm not going to move fast and break things, but we do need to move fast. and we do need to use technology. I know it has its flaws, as we've seen ups and downs today, although you've managed it brilliantly. But the reality is we have to see it as a tool that can be used to support some of these efforts. And we need, especially given the digital divide that exists with older people generally, we need to cross that divide and figure out how to bridge it if we are going to be as successful as we want to be in encountering some of these challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peggy. In closing, I want to thank all of the speakers and the discussants. I've enjoyed learning and listening and sharing the opportunities and the insights to go forward. I can't add anything more than our expert speakers, because I think they've eloquently, not only captured insights, but also put a challenge to us. And so let us be the ones that reach across to sectors and disciplines. Let us not wait for someone else or some other agency to do it. It has to be us that reaches across to disciplines and sectors to create common inclusive agendas for the current and future generations. We've touched on a multitude of issues, but also solutions. Let it be us that takes this forward, as a symbol of hope, of unity, of possibilities, and reflecting on the pandemic and where we are in the pandemic, but knowing that every day we learn more and more about what we need to do, but also what's totally unacceptable. And so it's really that voice that needs to be louder, more insightful, more exacting, and really execute what we say that we're going to do. The last comment goes to a video that I had the great pleasure to watch this morning, and it was between Dr. Tedros and Sir Captain Tom Moore. And I urge you to go and watch this delightful conversation between, a gentleman who has and keeps walking and walking to ensure that, people wake up to the need of every single person needs to do something at this time in the world for someone else and not only themselves. And so Sir Captain Tom Moore, when Dr. Tedros said, and what is your takeaway message? What do we hope for? And he said, there will be a nice bright day tomorrow and the birds will sing. And so I leave you with that note and encourage you to watch Sir Captain Tom Moore. Thank you very much, and I hand the floor back to Andra.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to our panelists for a wonderful, thought-provoking session. And we see in the comments in the chat box how engaged all the participants are. So I now pass the floor over to our co-chair, Betty Levy, to move forward to the next portion of the day's event. And please unmute yourself, Betty.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I was totally blown away by that incredible discussion. We want to thank the panel so much for all your time and energy, the knowledge you put forward, and the rich conversation. We especially want to thank Jane for your skillful moderation and how you tied everything together and you pushed us all forward for a call to action, which is what we were hoping today would do. I do want to remind people that we have been posting the bios and we have been posting the link to the NGO COA website throughout the day. You will find lots of information and resources on the COA website, so please go there. Now, it's our honor to be able to host the launch of the World Population Aging 2020 Highlights Report. And it's my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Schmid, the Chief of the Fertility and Population Unit, UN DESA. The floor is yours, Carolyn.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here with you on this virtual platform to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons, and to introduce to you our forthcoming publication on population aging. This year, the theme is living arrangements of older persons. And we think it's a very timely report, and we could not anticipate how timely it is when we started to work on it. We, the Population Division, would like to express our sincere appreciation for this ongoing partnership with the NGO Committee on Aging, and for them to provide us again with an opportunity to launch our latest report on this very important day. I would also like to take a short moment to thank the team in the Population Division, because these reports are not the work of one or two people. It's really a group effort, and to get this off the ground and to also get it through the finishing line. I want to particularly acknowledge the work of two of my colleagues, Mrs. Imiko Kamiya and Mrs. Nicole Monson-Lay. Next, please. So that is the cover, so you know what to look out for. Next slide. This year's World Population Aging Highlights on Living Arrangements has 3 main chapters. The first chapter presents the key findings of the analysis of the UN Household and Living Arrangements database that provides data on older persons' living arrangements at a global level that we released at the end of 2019. That database is available on our website, and you can go at the internet. It's a very interactive platform, so you can go click on countries and see what is the situation. So we really invite you to access the website and look at the data we have. We then present also provisional insights into our analysis of available data on COVID-19, morbidity and mortality of older persons. And we conclude with a summary and a set of policy recommendations, and provide a set of annex tables for selected variables that were discussed in the report. Next slide, please. What are the key findings from the database? The data show that households and living arrangements of older persons globally change only slowly, from living in multi-generational households towards more independent living. But we also see that living arrangements can change quickly in times of crisis to respond to the needs of family members and kin. Such examples are, for example, we saw an uptick in multi-generational households in Europe and Northern America as a response to the 2008 economic crisis, or we saw an increase in skip generation households in sub-Saharan Africa to take care of orphaned grandchildren during and after the HIV/AIDS pandemic in that part of the world. We also found that older persons in the more developed world live more often independently. That means alone or with a spouse. And we found that older persons in the less developed world are more often found to live with a spouse and at least one child or with the extended family. Our analysis also finds considerable gender differences, and I think this is not new to us. We know that older women live more often alone than older men. Older women are often poorer than older men, and older women take care more often of grandchildren in skip generation households in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean, where migrating parents lift their children often to the care of the grandparents. Next slide, please. The second chapter presents the first results of an analysis of available data on COVID-19, morbidity and mortality of older persons. We found that COVID-19 mortality follows similar age patterns as general mortality, with considerable variations across countries. We also found that the main determinant for COVID-19 mortality and morbidity is the extent to which countries have been able to control the spread of the disease. And the data show that frailty is a key factor in this regard, with the risk of death increasing with age and existing comorbidities. Looking at living arrangements of older persons and their susceptibility to COVID-19, we found that living arrangements matter for contracting COVID-19 and for dying from it. The data show that nursing home residents experience high risks of infection and mortality, and that living independently reduces the infection risk. Next slide, please. Our analysis of the households and living arrangements of older persons, as well as the COVID-19 morbidity and mortality data, clearly show that living arrangements of older persons do matter. They matter for the socioeconomic, as well as the physical and mental health and well-being of older persons and their families. We also want to call on governments, civil society, and academia to acknowledge the importance of living arrangements of older persons for policy and program formulation and implementation, particularly with a view to implement successfully the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and to achieve the related Sustainable Development Goals. At this point, I would like to thank you all for listening to this very brief presentation. I would like to invite you to visit the Population Division website. We have so far posted a two-pager on the 10 key findings of the report. We are in the process of finalizing the report itself, and it should become available early next week on our website. Thank you very much, and we welcome any feedback, questions, comments you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. Now, I had mentioned earlier that one of our major sponsors is the Group of Friends of Older Persons, and Chile, of the 25 nations, Chile is currently the chair of that group. And we have with us today the First Lady of Chile, who is a very appropriate representative because she has been very involved in aging issues in Chile.
El envejecimiento de la población es un fenómeno sin precedentes que trae consigo una serie de desafíos para todos los países, lo cual nos obliga a unirnos y trabajar juntos en pos de las personas mayores. Por esta razón, la Organización Mundial de la Salud liderará, en consonancia con los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, la década del envejecimiento saludable 2020-2030, década en la cual realizaremos un esfuerzo mundial para marcar una diferencia en la vida de las personas y sus entornos, porque el objetivo está puesto en que las personas mayores tengan una vida activa, saludable e integral. La tarea entonces está en generar entornos desde el punto de vista jurídico, desde el punto de vista de las políticas públicas y programas para la participación social y desde los territorios, para que las personas mayores puedan hacer lo que les gusta y con esto tener una vejez llena de significado. Esta vejez será un ejemplo para las nuevas generaciones. Queremos que ser una persona mayor signifique tener proyectos de vida, aprender, trabajar, emprender y continuar contribuyendo a la sociedad. Reconocemos también que existen distintas maneras de envejecer, por lo cual nadie puede quedar a la deriva. Los sistemas sociales y de salud deben adecuarse a las particularidades de las personas mayores en cada país, rompiendo las barreras de acceso, entrenando a recursos humanos capacitados para poder entregar una atención integrada y personalizada acorde a las necesidades particulares de cada persona mayor y sus entornos de apoyo. En este desafío, las enfermeras y matronas celebradas este año serán piezas fundamentales en la gestión del cuidado. Gandhi decía, sé el cambio que quieres ver en el mundo. Creo firmemente que somos nosotros quienes debemos liderar el cambio, mejorando la imagen social de la vejez, fomentando las oportunidades de participación e integrando los sistemas para la atención de las personas mayores en nuestros países. La invitación está hecha. La década del envejecimiento saludable ya está aquí. Ahora está en nuestras manos darle vida.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure and privilege for us to have the First Lady of Chile giving remarks from the group of Friends of Older Persons. They are so supportive of us and the work that everyone does on behalf of being champions for older persons. And what a wonderful comment when she quoted Gandhi, "Be the change you want to see." That is probably a very good message as we begin to conclude. I'd like to now introduce Masumi Ono, who's the chief of the Social Inclusion and Participation Branch of UNDESA. While she's new to this role as of February, she's not new to the United Nations system. She's been there for over 25 years and has wide experience, but including working on supporting the Sustainable Development Goal agenda out of the Secretary General's office. So what a pleasure to have Masumi Ono with us today to bring us the concluding remarks for this year's 30th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons. Masumi?
Thank you, Betty, Martha, and Jane for wonderfully facilitating the sessions. And thank you to all the speakers and participants for bringing such enriching ideas to this event. You've touched upon so many important topics as we work together towards promoting the well-being and human rights of older persons, especially on the health dimension with the COVID-19 pandemic as a backdrop. This year, we commemorate both the 75th year of the United Nations and the 30th year of the International Day of Older Persons. And so this is the year to move more swiftly towards implementing policies to ensure a truly inclusive society in which older persons participate fully without discrimination and on the basis of equality. Some of these policies have been highlighted in our discussions today. Our speakers have pointed out how COVID-19 has revealed many challenges and that we must open the doors and move forward faster in a better direction to renew our ambition, our leadership, and our collective action. Speakers have elaborated on how the decade of healthy aging will support our efforts during the pandemic, but also beyond, and how it will expand our understanding of what it means for health services to be truly responsive to older persons. We appreciate our colleagues at DESA Population Division for recognizing the importance of living arrangements of older persons to their susceptibility to infection and mortality, and for providing us all with a more in-depth analysis of related available data to guide our policy work. It is clear we still need to do so much as a society to better understand how our health services have to evolve in order to fully integrate the choices, needs, and challenges of older persons, in particular long-term care. As brought up by our colleagues from Human Rights, the right to health is a fundamental part of our human rights and of our understanding of a life with dignity. The role of communities and older persons themselves in being active agents has been underlined in the discussions and needs to be kept at the center of our future actions. I am proud to say my mother in Japan was a manager of long-term care facilities, and now at age 70 plus, she's still hard at work as staff. Her younger cousin is a nurse, very much on the front lines during these very difficult times. So it is essential to recognize the ability of older persons to lead, not only in their own betterment, but also in that of society as a whole. And let us remember that we should not fall short of the aspirations of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, in which it calls for us to embrace the potential of the aging population as a basis for future development. As we approach the end of our program, please allow me to address our partners at the NGO Committee on Aging in New York. Today, as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons, we also celebrate you. We celebrate today acknowledging that it builds on a long history of your growing commitment and interaction with member states' delegations and UN entities. It was and continues to be vital to our work that governments listen to the voices of older persons themselves, and we are grateful to you for making that happen year after year. You have laid down an ethical vision that ensures basic human rights for older people everywhere, and that is anchored around the concept of growing older with dignity, rooted in your rigorous work and networks to help move this new vision forward. From our entire UN family, we thank you. In particular, I wish to acknowledge the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York, Cynthia Stewart, the co-chairs of today's event, Betty Levy and Martha Bile. Big thanks to Erica Dar of AARP, Tara Cortez, Mabel Bianco, and Yasmin Amini for your support in organizing. We are all also so grateful to the IFA team under the leadership of its Secretary General Jane Barrett for generously hosting today's event and for working closely with UNDESA, my colleagues Amal, Julia, Chateau, Miriam, Claudia, and Amin. There are so many people behind this event, and I'm so sorry for not mentioning each and every one of you. We very much look forward to our continued work together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masumi, for that wonderful and insightful wrap up of the day and charging us all to move forward. We too have a lot of thank yous and acknowledgements. And Andrea, if you could start showing the slides. We have a long list. Okay, so Martha and I are so pleased that all of you could join us today. We do apologize for some of the technical glitches, but that's to be expected. But I think the program was outstanding. Personally, I need to thank Martha for being such a wonderful partner. And for all of you, you don't know this, Martha and I never have met in person. We started working together on this project right as COVID started, and we've suddenly become Zoom BFFs.
Yeah.
We have so many people to thank. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we especially need to thank our generous supporters, for starters, as Masumi thanked. IFA, first of all, for hosting this event. They do regular events every week, but this was asking them to take on something bigger with many more people and many more technical complications, so we really appreciate it. We also want to thank AARP and the M&T Bank, as well as our co-sponsors, the Group of Friends of Older Persons. And of course, this day could not have happened without the hard work of Amal Abu Rafet, Chief of the Program on Aging Unit, and her entire team, as well as two major committees of the NGO Committee on Aging. There was a very active planning committee that hung in there for 4 months of regular meetings.
Next slide.
And a communications committee for all their hard work. And of course, all this was led by our Cynthia Stewart, our NGO Committee on Aging Chair, and the Executive Committee of the NGO's COA.
Next slide.
their support. A huge shout out to, am I going too fast for the group? Yes, there's the Committee on Aging Executive Committee. And if you go to the website, you'll see them also listed. Or write us a letter and they're all on the letterhead and we'll write you a letter back. And now also a huge shout out to the creative team and the technical team. So Magda on the creative slide preparation side was Magda Kazmarska and Yasmin Amini. And on the technical side, both of them too, but mainly Chesley Ryder and Andra Stanku for all their work behind the scenes, with added help today from an intern with the American Psychological Association, Adam Calderon, who's been working on our social media platform. And to all the speakers who generously gave their time today or pre-recorded videos.
Go through the slides again, please. We also want to acknowledge the UN Symphony Orchestra's musical director, Predrag Basic, and all the musicians who donated their time and energy for putting together that beautiful musical interlude. And finally, but not last, we want to thank all the interpreters, the ASL interpreters, the French, the Spanish, and the closed captioning stenographer, and the tech team at Interprenet. This event would not have been as successful without your help. So we thank you.
And thank you to everyone who participated in this event, all more than 900 of you. And hopefully, and the comments on the chat, which we will take very seriously and compile for further recommendations. And hopefully everyone is energized now to move this plan of action forward for a decade of healthy aging. And together in unison, we are going to, Betty and I are going to try to say this, goodbye.
Goodbye, and hope to see you
all next year.
Bye.